The episode begins with Rugabe takes Mark down to her lab and asks why he didn't throw away Petey's phone. Mark questions who she is. She tells him she helped Petey with his procedure. Mark accuses her of killing Petey, but Rugabe insists he wouldn't have died if he'd followed her instructions. She reveals she's the one who inserted the chip in Mark's head and is the only one who can deactivate it. Mark says he might not want it deactivated. Rugabe says both he and his innie want to do what's right, even if they don't know it. Mr. Grainer shows up and greets Mark. He asks if Mark is talking to anyone, but Rugabe sneaks up behind Grainer and beats him to death with a baseball bat. Rugabe explains that Grainer was the head of security for the severed floor. She tells Mark to help her drag Grainer's body down the hall. Mark is about to throw up, but Rugabe tells him to hold it in since his DNA is on it. She gives Mark Grainer's access key card and tells him to take it to work tomorrow so his innie will know what to do. Rugabe asks for Petey's phone and tells Mark to go home and get rid of his clothes. She warns him she'll be in touch and shouts at him to leave. Mark goes outside, vomits, and then runs home. He takes off his clothes and puts them in a garbage bag. Alexa comes downstairs and asks where he's been. He says he might have just had a dream. She says she's been awake for an hour, and Mark apologizes, saying he needed to drive. Alexa asks if he's okay, and Mark says it's a big deal for him. She asks if she should leave, and Mark says, maybe. The next morning, Mark gets ready for work, pockets Grainer's keycard, and throws his clothes in the trash. Mrs. Selvig notices Mark seems troubled and offers to talk later. Milchick checks the new sliding doors in the macrodata department and finds the card Dylan hid under the bathroom toilet. He checks on Bert and drops off the missing card, saying they can focus on the final preparations. Milchick praises Bert's work and says he deserves something special. Bert hopes it's not another trip to the break room. Milchick assures him it's something more. Milchick welcomes Dylan to work and explains the overtime contingency, which is for emergencies. Dylan is confused, as they've never mentioned it before. Dylan asks if the boy he saw was Milchick's son. Milchick tells him to forget about it and not talk to anyone about it. Outie Mark gets ready to head downstairs, puts the keycard in his pocket, and heads to work. Milchick greets innie Mark at the elevator and escorts him to his desk. Mark is surprised to see that the macrodata department is now locked. Mark greets Helly, Dylan, and Irving. Milchick gets Mark a coffee and leaves. He calls Ms. Coble to tell her Grainer didn't show up and asks where she is. Ms. Coble, as Mrs. Selvig, is with Devon, helping her with nursing. Mrs. Selvig shares a funny story about breast pumping, and Devon laughs. Devon asks if Mrs. Selvig has anywhere to be, but she says she's enjoying herself. Devon mentions meeting a rich woman named Gabby at a birthing retreat, but Gabby didn't remember her. Devon wonders if Severance could be done outside of Lumen. Mrs. Selvig laughs it off and asks about Mark instead. Devon talks about Mark severing after his wife died. Mrs. Selvig talks about how she thought she saw her husband everywhere after he died and asks if Mark ever thinks he sees his wife. Meanwhile, Dylan works on numbers. Irving asks Mark about the lack of soap labels in the bathroom and wonders about OND. Mark tells Irving to stop worrying about Bert. Irving insists Bert may be disciplined. Dylan coldly remarks that he warned Irving this would happen. Milchick enters with a record player and announces that because Helly reached 75% on Sienna, she's earned a 5-minute music dance experience. Helly picks Defiant Jazz and a maraca. Mark and Irving dance along while Milchick controls the lights. Dylan continues working, unfazed. Milchick dances behind him, but Dylan snaps and attacks Milchick, biting his arm and screaming, "What is his name?" Helly turns the lights back on while Mark and Irving pull Dylan off Milchick. Milchick, bleeding, threatens to report Dylan to Ms. Coble. Dylan challenges him and asks if he wants to go together. Milchick leaves. Mark asks Dylan what happened, and Dylan explains that he woke up in his house with his son, but Milchick pulled him away, and it was over. Dylan insists it was his son, but Irving disagrees. Helly realizes that if the higher-ups can wake them up on the outside, they should be able to do it themselves. Irving insists they're just innies, and the controls must be in an inaccessible place. Mark pulls out Grainer's keycard and tells them it was in his pocket when he arrived. Helly wonders why Mark's Audi would have the head of security's keycard. She suggests a field trip to the security office. Mark agrees, even though Dylan and Irving are afraid. Dylan stays behind. Mark, Irving, and Helly use the keycard to leave the office and head to the security room. They find surveillance feeds, and Helly finds a manual. Mark notices Ms. Coble arriving on the elevator. Helly takes a page with information about the overtime contingency. They hear Coble coming, so they hurry to leave. Ms. Coble meets with Natalie, who says Grainer is dead. Natalie suggests the person who killed Grainer might be the same person who killed Petey. Coble talks about reintegration and says she has proof. She speaks to the board, agreeing to meet them at the Egan family gala to discuss it further. Irving arrives at Optics and Design to find a melon party. Mark, Helly, and Dylan gather in the storage closet. Helly reviews the stolen information and says the overtime contingency is simple to use. Mark realizes one of them must stay behind. Dylan volunteers, but Helly says it's a two-person job. Dylan insists he can do it. At Bert's retirement party, Milchick plays a video message from Bert's Audi. The Audi talks about being tired but fulfilled and not remembering anything about his job. The O&D team applauds. Irving asks if they're just going to stand there and let Bert die. Milchick says Bert's Audi is simply retiring. Irving gets angry, saying Milchick doesn't understand what it's like. Milchick orders him back to MDR, but Bert asks if Irving can stay. Milchick agrees as long as Irving stays respectful. Milchick plays Bert's song choice for his retirement, Paul Anka's Time of Your Life. Everyone shakes Bert's hand, and Irving is the last to do so. Milchick leads a sad Irving back to the macrodata department. Back at the storage closet, Mark, Helly, and Dylan talk. Dylan admits he already saw his son but can't see him again. Irving expresses his desire to burn the place down. Audi Mark drinks whiskey alone at home. He scrolls through the news and lingers on an article about the college. A knock at the door. It's Alexa, who accidentally left her phone. She comes to pick it up, but they talk awkwardly. Mark gives her his phone, and Alexa says she doesn't think he's ready for anything. Mark looks at a photo of Gemma and rips it up, trying to show he's over her. But later, he tapes the photo back together, thinking about all the good memories. The woman in the photo is Ms. Casey. Stay tuned for amazing recaps.